Hi Internet! In this video, we are going to cover pregame topics, selecting a mission, the scouting phase, and deployment.
We will also cover the very beginning of the battle round with the initiative phase. So without further ado, let's get to it.
Before you even get started thinking of the rules, models, rounds, phases, etc., it's important to start with why you're doing all that other stuff. There are many missions in many books. There's the core manual, the arena book, elites, commanders, if you can even find that anymore, and a lot of faction special kill team boxes that come with cards for unique missions. A lot of those have been collected, however, into the Kill Team Annual, which was released in 2019.
No matter where you choose a mission from, in essence, you have a setup and a victory condition. The mission will detail how you build and deploy onto the battlefield, and the victory condition will describe how you either earn victory points in playing out the mission, or will outline a singular objective that dictates either victory or defeat.
One of our favorite mission structures used in the competitive scene rewards holding objectives, killing enemy models, and accomplishing personalized secondary objectives. These missions, developed by the tournament organizers for events like the Las Vegas Open, the SoCal Open, and the Bay Area Open, improve upon the foundation that was given to us by Games Workshop and create fantastic scenarios for you to play out. Missions from these packets level the playing field for all factions, giving everyone a fighting chance.
And for speaking honestly, a lot of the missions from the books described before are fairly skewed towards certain teams being significantly better. Many of the recent tournament packets are made available by Sheldon, who runs KillTeamStream.com. He has also put together a casual packet, which incorporates all of these improvements made upon the game in the competitive scene into a packet for casual play. We'll put a link in the description directly to that packet.
With all that said, if you don't have access or would rather use a mission from one of the official sources, go for it! Some of them are fantastic and provide unique setups and challenges that you won't find in any of the packets we've linked and are worth playing for the fun factor and experience alone.
The game is played on a 22-inch by 30-inch board. As mentioned in our intro video, if you don't have a board or terrain, it's perfectly fine to measure out and mark the play space with dice, tape, or whatever you find lying around. And you can use books, soda cans, tissue boxes as makeshift terrain in a pinch. It's also a good idea to designate the deployment areas as noted in the mission so that they're both clearly marked. We like to mark the extent of these deployment zones with a dice that we're not actually using at the moment.
It's generally a good idea, unless you are using a standardized layout like in the Arena expansion, to set up the terrain with your opponent. If you need advice on how to set up fair and fun terrain, check out our very first video, Terrain is Tricky.
It's expected that you introduce your models to your opponent in the pregame phase as well, so that way there's no confusion as to which models are your leaders and which are your specialists. Also, it's considered good sportsmanship to allow time for your opponent to ask questions about your models, even down to granular questions like information that would be on their data sheets. Remember, they might not be familiar with your models, and you might not be familiar with theirs either, especially when you're just starting out.
The first rule of Kill Team is, we don't talk about the scouting phase. The second rule of Kill Team is, we do not talk about that scouting phase. In all seriousness, it's an interesting concept, but in practice it's just not that fun and it doesn't add that much to the game.
Most people we've played with will always skip the scouting phase. And Games Workshop seems to agree with that, as their later Kill Team books all explicitly state to not resolve the scouting phase for their mission. If you want to use it, go for it. You can find the rules for the scouting phase on page 49 of the core manual. Honestly, though, you're really not missing much if you skip it.
Once all that is said and done, you then roll off for Strategic Advantage.
Hey, I heard those guys are pretty cool.
Handsome, too. Each player rolls 2d6, and the player with the higher value is said to have Strategic Advantage. The player who wins the roll-off and gets the Strategic Advantage usually gets to choose which deployment zone they start in, and the player who loses this roll has to deploy the first model. Although some missions will change this up, so make sure you read your mission description.
As just mentioned, the player who loses strategic advantage will typically deploy the first model. To deploy a model, you simply place a model wholly within your designated deployment zone. Each player takes turns deploying one model at a time. If one player runs out of models to deploy, The other player deploys the rest of their models at that time.
The Elites book introduced rules for deploying units into reserves. You can deploy no more than half of your kill team into reserves by both model count and points value. If you put a model into reserves, your model is not on the board at the beginning of the game, but can appear on the board at the end of the movement phase. You can keep a model off the board until the end of Battle Round 3's movement phase. If you do not bring the model in from reserves by that point, the model is taken out of action for good.
Models entering the battlefield from reserves can enter in one of three ways. First, they can come within 1 inch of the battlefield edge within your own deployment zone, as long as there are no enemies within 5 inches of it. Second, you may spend 1 command point for the tactic outflanked and enter within 1 inch of any board edge. Again, not within 5 inches of any opposing models. Third, there are some specific faction tactics that allow for 1 or more models to arrive on the board from reserves with even greater flexibility, as long as, you guessed it, they are not within 5 inches of any opposing models.
There's a lot more we can say about deployment, but that's for another video. Now we can start. All the pregame stuff up until this point becomes very quick once you have played some games and get some experience, so the perceived pregame time sink is not as dire as it may seem right now.
While not described as a discrete phase, it's important to point out that there should be a pause right before each new battle round, which we just call the beginning of the battle round. The reason for this is certain effects take place at this point, and at the very least, this is where you would be gaining your command points.
Additionally, the veteran specialist tactic, adaptive tactics, as well as choosing canicals for the Adeptus Mechanicus kill teams resolve during the beginning of the battle round. You return to this pause at the beginning of each round.
And now we're in the game. Phase 1 of the battle round is the initiative phase. It's very straightforward. Each player rolls 2d6, and the player with the higher value is said to have initiative. If you tie, you re-roll. Simple as that.
This happens every battle round, so the player with initiative can change every round, or it can stay the same just as easily. For players with Big Hammer experience, this is different than what you are used to, where the same player goes first every round.
Hooray! We covered what to do in pregame and even dipped our toes into the flow of the game with initiative phase. Our next video will cover movement phase. See you there.
Bye!